For over 70 years, the US dollar has been the world's reserve currency, the currency that backs international trade, the currency that central banks hold in their reserves, the currency that oil is priced in, the currency that dominates global finance. This status has given America an extraordinary privilege, a privilege no other country enjoys: the ability to borrow in its own currency, the ability to print money to pay debts, the ability to run massive trade deficits without consequences, the ability to live far beyond its means. Because the world needs dollars for oil, for trade, for reserves. And as long as the world needs dollars, America can keep printing them. But that is changing. 4 forces are converging. 4 unstoppable forces that will end the dollar's dominance. And when the dollar loses its reserve status, America will face a reckoning unlike anything in its history. Because the privilege that allowed America to borrow $38 trillion, to run trillion-dollar deficits, to import far more than it exports, will disappear. And America will have to live within its means for the first time in generations. This is the wealth records, where every video will change how you see money, history, and the systems controlling your life. If you're new here, hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because what you're about to learn is the most important economic shift happening in the world today, and almost no one is paying attention. Do you think the dollar will lose its reserve status in your lifetime? Or will America maintain dominance? Drop your take below. To understand why the dollar will collapse, you need to understand what reserve currency status means, and what it has allowed America to do for the past 70 years. A reserve currency is the currency that other countries hold in their central bank reserves. The currency they use to settle international trade, the currency they trust to store value. For most of history, there was no single reserve currency. Countries traded in gold, or in their own currencies, or in the currency of whichever empire dominated at the time. The British pound was the reserve currency in the 19th and early 20th centuries when Britain ruled the world. But after World War II, Britain was broke, its empire was collapsing, and a new power emerged: the United States. At the Bretton Woods Conference in 1944, while the war was still raging, the Allied powers agreed to a new system. The US dollar would be backed by gold at $35 per ounce, and every other currency would be pegged to the dollar. This made the dollar as good as gold, and it made the dollar the center of the global financial system. For the next 27 years, the dollar was the reserve currency because it was backed by gold. But in 1971, that changed. President Nixon, facing massive debts from the Vietnam War and Great Society programs, closed the gold window. He announced that the US would no longer exchange dollars for gold. The dollar became fiat currency, backed by nothing except the promise of the US government. And yet, the dollar remained the reserve currency. Why? Because the world still needed it. And the reason the world needed it was oil. In 1973, the United States made a deal with Saudi Arabia. The deal was simple. Saudi Arabia would sell its oil only in US dollars, and in exchange, the United States would provide military protection to the Saudi regime. This was the birth of the Petrodollar system. And it changed everything, because oil is the most important commodity in the world. Every country needs it to power their economies, to fuel their militaries, to run their industries. And if oil could only be bought in dollars, then every country needed dollars. So countries around the world had to earn dollars by exporting to America. And they had to hold dollars in their reserves to buy oil. This created insatiable demand for dollars, which allowed America to print dollars without limit. Because no matter how many dollars America printed, the world needed them to buy oil, to trade, to hold as reserves. This is the exorbitant privilege. The term was coined by a French finance minister in the 1960s, and it describes the extraordinary advantage America gained from having the reserve currency. America could borrow in its own currency. If America owed money, it could simply print more dollars to pay the debt. No other country could do this. If Japan owes money in yen, it must tax its people or cut spending to repay. It cannot print yen to pay debts owed in dollars, but America owes almost all its debt in dollars. So it can print, and it has. The U.S. national debt was $400 billion in 1971 when Nixon closed the gold window. Today, it is $38 trillion, nearly 100 times larger. This was only possible because of reserve currency status. Because the world needed dollars, America could keep printing them without hyperinflation. The inflation was exported to the rest of the world, and America lived far beyond its means. But this system is ending. 4 forces are dismantling the petrodollar, and once it falls, the dollar will lose its reserve status, and America will lose its exorbitant privilege. The first force is BRICS de-dollarization. BRICS stands for Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. 5 major emerging economies that together represent over 40% of the world's population and a growing share of global GDP. For years, BRICS has talked about reducing dependence on the dollar, but it was mostly talk, until recently. In 2022, when Russia invaded Ukraine, the United States and Europe froze Russia's dollar reserves. They cut Russia out of the SWIFT international payment system. They seized Russian assets held in Western banks. This was financial warfare, and it worked. Russia's economy was hit hard, but it also sent a message to every other country in the world. If you displease the United States, your money can be turned off. Your reserves can be frozen. Your access to the global financial system can be cut. This terrified countries, especially countries that do not have close alignment with the United States. China, India, Brazil, Saudi Arabia, the Gulf states, African nations. They realized that holding dollars made them vulnerable, that the US could weaponize the dollar against them at any time. And this accelerated de-dollarization. China and Russia now trade in Yuan and rubles, no dollars. India is buying Russian oil in rupees. Saudi Arabia, which for 50 years sold oil only in dollars, is now accepting Yuan for oil sales to China. This breaks the petrodollar. The United Arab Emirates is trading oil in Yuan. Brazil and China have agreed to trade in their own currencies, bypassing the dollar entirely. And over 40 countries have expressed interest in joining BRICS because they want an alternative to the dollar system. They want a system where the United States cannot freeze their assets or cut off their trade. BRICS is developing its own payment system to rival SWIFT. It is discussing a BRICS currency backed by gold or a basket of commodities. And while this will take years to build, the direction is clear. The world is moving away from the dollar. The second force is unsustainable U.S. debt. The United States owes $38 trillion, and it is growing by over $2 trillion per year. Interest payments on the debt now exceed $1.1 trillion per year. This is more than the defense budget, more than Medicare, and it will keep growing because the debt is compounding. The U.S. is borrowing to pay interest on the debt it already owes. This is unsustainable, and everyone knows it. There are only 3 ways this can end. The U.S. can cut spending and raise taxes dramatically to pay down the debt. But this is political suicide. No politician will do it. The U.S. can default on the debt, refuse to pay, but this would destroy the dollar's credibility and end its reserve status immediately. Or the U.S. can inflate the debt away, print money, pay off the debt with devalued dollars. This is what will happen, because it is the politically easiest option. But printing money to pay debt destroys the value of the currency. And when the world sees that the U.S. is deliberately devaluing the dollar to escape its debts, they will dump dollars. Because holding dollars means watching your savings lose value. Central banks will sell U.S. treasuries. They will buy gold. They will buy yuan. They will buy anything other than dollars. And the more they sell, the more the dollar will fall. This is already beginning. Central banks around the world are net sellers of U.S. treasuries for the first time in decades. And they are buying gold at the fastest pace in history. They see what is coming. And they are preparing. The third force is the weaponization of the dollar. The United States has used the dollar as a weapon for decades. Sanctions on Iran, sanctions on North Korea, sanctions on Venezuela. These countries were cut off from the dollar system, their assets frozen, their ability to trade destroyed. And for years, this worked, because there was no alternative to the dollar. If you were cut off from the dollar system, you were cut off from the global economy. But the sanctions on Russia changed the calculation. Russia is not a small country. It is the largest country by land area. It has immense natural resources, oil, gas, wheat, minerals, fertilizer. It is a nuclear power. And it has close relationships with China, India, and much of the developing world. When the U.S. froze Russia's reserves and cut it from SWIFT, Russia did not collapse. It adapted. It traded in rubles and yuan. It built alternative payment systems. It deepened ties with China and India. And it survived. This showed the world 2 things. First, that the U.S. will weaponize the dollar even against major powers. And second, that it is possible to survive outside the dollar system. If Russia can do it, others can too. And this has made countries less willing to hold dollars, because dollars come with political risk. If you hold dollars, you are subject to U.S. foreign policy. If the U.S. decides you are an enemy, your money can be taken. This is not a reserve currency. This is a weapon, and countries are looking for alternatives. The fourth force is the loss of America's productive base. In 1971, when the dollar became fiat, America was the world's manufacturing powerhouse. It made cars, steel, electronics, machinery. The dollar was backed by gold until 1971. But after 1971, it was backed by America's productive economy, by the goods and services America produced. This gave the dollar value. But over the next 50 years, America offshored its manufacturing to China, to Mexico, to Asia. American companies moved factories overseas to cut costs. And America became a service economy, finance, technology, entertainment. Today, America imports far more than it exports. It runs a massive trade deficit, over $800 billion per year. It buys goods from China and pays in dollars. And China holds those dollars as reserves. But what backs those dollars? Not gold, not manufacturing. Just the promise that America will repay its debts. And as America's debt grows and its manufacturing declines, the promise becomes less credible. China makes things, America prints money, and at some point, China will decide it has enough dollars. It will stop accepting them, and the dollar will collapse. These four forces are unstoppable. BRICS de-dollarization is accelerating. Dozens of countries want to join. They are building alternative payment systems. They are trading in their own currencies. The momentum is irreversible. U.S. debt is unsustainable. It will reach $50 trillion within a decade, $60 trillion soon after. There is no political will to cut spending or raise taxes, so the debt will grow until it destroys the currency. The weaponization of the dollar cannot be undone. The U.S. has shown that it will freeze assets and cut countries from the financial system. Trust is broken. Countries will diversify away from dollars to reduce their vulnerability. And America's productive base cannot be rebuilt quickly. It took decades to offshore manufacturing. It will take decades to bring it back, if it ever comes back at all. So the collapse of the dollar is not a matter of if, it is a matter of when. And what happens when the dollar loses reserve status? America loses its exorbitant privilege. It can no longer borrow unlimited amounts in its own currency. It can no longer print money without consequences. It can no longer run massive trade deficits. It will have to balance its budget, or face hyperinflation. It will have to export more than it imports, or face a collapsing currency. It will have to live within its means. And for a country that has lived beyond its means for 50 years, this will be devastating. Living standards will fall. The government will have to cut spending dramatically. Social Security, Medicare, defense, all will face cuts. Taxes will rise. Inflation will soar as the currency loses value. And Americans will be poor, much poorer. This is the reckoning. The bill for 50 years of printing and borrowing is coming due, and there is no way to avoid it. History doesn't repeat, but if you don't understand it, it will crush you all the same. The dollar's dominance is ending. The forces are in motion, and America is not prepared. If this gave you a new perspective, hit subscribe. The Wealth Records, history has the answers. I'll show you where to look.